Coming together, the lower and the upper Nile made a state. They had to organize in some kind of protective fashion to become a state and to relate to the states in the South that was the basis of their origin. And they came together, Upper and Lower Nile, and formed a country that the Greeks would call Egypt. And in their writings, in their folklore, in their myth, they created so much of the literature that will go into the literature of the world's three major religions, and that will go into the making of what the European calls civilization. What you forget in looking at Europe, and this is why people get away with so much, we don't look at the chronology of Europe. And when you look at the chronology of Europe, they began to emerge around 850 BC. What was happening in Africa, 850 BC? Egypt had spread itself so thin, it was now threatening. On the eve of the 25th dynasty. Now, look at the dynasties of Egypt. After the 25th, there was nothing left worth being called a dynasty. That was the last walk in the sun when the brothers from the south moved up north and showed Egypt how to control a nation one more time. That last walk in the sun ended thousands of years of civilized living. And why could Egypt sustain such a large population over such a large area? It had a suitable food supply. It had a suitable housing supply. It had a spiritual life that did not offend the people or put one against the other. It already had every element that would go into the making of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Different people with different approaches to the religion made different things out of it. And some made God ungodly. That is true of Eastern religions also, because in the Hindu faith, they speak of the sacred cow, but not the sacred human being. So they're all true. Then people got into a habit of making comparative studies of their respective chosen gods, which was the worst thing they could have done, given the circumstances. If you look up the word God in a good etymological dictionary, God itself means different things, but none of the information about any of the gods gives them the right and the privilege of cursing anybody, for the gods do not curse. And people must get this through their skull. Gods do not curse. Gods do not favor. The very word God eliminates that. Now, with the coming of foreigners to Africa from Western Asia, people not too certain about who they are in the history of the world, then or now. They began because they could not have an African way of life. They were not equal to that kind of communalism. They became grabbers, created the embryo of what would later be capitalism. Now, you think capitalism will resolve that if you got enough money. But if you got the money you wanted, you would have to cheat somebody, because that in itself creates an imbalance. So there is nothing wrong with capitalism properly used. It has to be used for the people and not against the people. And I do not believe it is impossible for capitalism to be democratic and to be honest and still survive. Yes, you have people who want super profits, and they began to destroy the sovereignty of other people and other nations. And when they take away your sovereignty, your responsibility, your very being, your essence of your political life, and they take away so much that goes with your spiritual and physical life. We have not talked enough about culture and the role of culture in sustaining a people. You have to first recognize you have culture separate and distinct from that of your oppressor, and that so much of that culture comes out of your trying to live in an atmosphere not exactly created in your favor. And you are adjusting to somebody else's culture and somebody else's habits. A people, by virtue of living, creates a cultural style. It creates even a killing style. This is why I didn't believe the thing about O.J. Not that black men don't kill, they do. They don't kill that way.
Yeah, come on.
You see, physical mutilization in that way is
Teach
part of the killing style.
Teach it, man.
Of another people, mostly Mediterranean whites. Sometimes we are passion killers.
Come on.
If an African man says, I'm going to kill you, if you avoid him 24 hours, you can end the whole thing. He changed his mind.
Come on.
So if you're going to kill, he got to kill you right away, or leave you alone. See, when people study styles, approaches of other people, so many blacks have gone to their grave for things they did not commit could have been saved, because that approach is not our approach. We don't stay around and play over the dead body.
Come on.
You're dead, you're dead. We're gone.
Yeah.
And so when people study that, a whole lot of things, sometimes we're charged with. It was, that's not exactly the way we do it. We're passion killers. Gonna kill right away. Don't let you go, but let you go right away. And we just don't hold grudges as long as some other people. I lose sense of the possibilities. I'm still talking about nationhood. What do you have to do to sustain a nation? What are the responsibilities? People must be fed. Things must be distributed as close to equal as possible. People must be educated. And so when you gain control of a nation, all these things must be in your hands. And if they are in the hands of your former colonial master, you are not sovereign. You are not free. Now, Jamaica, if it had it together, had its political house in order, its culture house in order, it could sustain all the islands in the Caribbean Sea. There's nothing wrong with Jamaica being the sustaining island. It's the largest. It has the largest number of technically trained people for the kind of age in which we live. So we have to start reconsidering things and develop frameworks that will leave different people sovereign but dependent as others would be dependent on them. And an exchange of what one has got. Now, Jamaica can make enough potatoes for all of the islands, if it would. And yet some of the islands are sent to the United States paying 3 times more for potatoes. We have to come together as a people, supporting ourselves, educating ourselves, and estimate how many shoes we need, and if we could just sell half of the shoes, we can estimate the profit. And it could be tremendous. What I'm trying to say is that we shouted nation time too soon. We shouted nation time before we understood what goes into the making of a nation, before we made an inventory of the needs of a nation to make sure we have on hand the technicians, the supply lines, the educational system that could sustain a whole nation. Until you get that in focus, you are sovereign, you're not sovereign. No matter how many limousines your president rides in, or how high the flag, it's nothing gonna make your nation except self-reliance. And when we look at Du Bois, Booker Washington, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, all these men were saying basically the same thing using different words. And it was not a problem. It was not a problem of one or the other. We needed all of them in the time slot that the Creator put them on the earth. For each message carries on from the other message. One is reinforcing the message of the other. Now, if we knew this, the Congo situation would be such a situation We knew when it came to power superficially, we knew that was one of the richest spots in Africa. So what are we going to do with our people who can take that rich spot and transfer it into a great and powerful sovereign nation without taking the rights of any of the people in the nation? I am excited about what's happening in Zaire, now renamed the Congo. But I think too many people after Lumumba, after Mobutu, have about the same ambitions as Mobutu. And I hope those people won't just create another dictatorial power. In this country, which is so rich, and maybe the richest single country in all Africa, in gold, manganese, and copper, but rich in agriculture to the point they can rent the Germans a piece of land more than equivalent to the state of Delaware just for rifle range.
The new 2024 GMC Sierra HD. Get 5.9% APR for 84 months on Sierra Heavy Duty.
In the first place, I don't know why anybody should let another nation have a rifle range of that size in its own country. That is part of the usurpation of the sovereign rights of the people of the Congo. Some parts of the Congo are so rich agriculturally, they have to put halters on the cows to keep them from eating themselves to death. In my last trip to that country, I got with a Congolese intellect. We went to a place called Kiev. Here the grass is so green and luscious, you have to stop the cows from eating, or they eat themselves to death. We got some of that same grass, went back to the hotel, cleaned it, and ate it as a salad. It was a decent salad. We were eating as good as the cows. What I'm trying to point out, if this country is that rich agriculturally, there is no excuse why anybody in that country should be hungry. And yet there are people there hungry. One of the biggest thieves in the Congo was one of Jack Onassis' personal friends. I won't call him a boyfriend, but he was a personal friend. But he let Mobutu steal a lot so he can steal even more. And he's still walking around without a scratch. In what is now Zimbabwe, that used to be Southern Rhodesia, Ian Smith controlled his personal land in that country is larger than the state of Delaware. Here's a man that killed thousands of Africans. And when the rebels left the field and that the politicians made peace, he's now a part of the parliament. His office is close to that of the president of the country. He should have been killed the first day. Now the African is not only hospitable to strangers and invaders, he's merciful and sometimes more merciful to them than to his own. Many of the Africans are not willing to forgive the atrocity that has demeaned their continent for well over 200 years. They're not willing to forgive. When did white people forgive? Did they forgive the Nazis? They went to Nuremberg and put them on trial. And the key ones got hung if they didn't commit suicide ahead of time. I think we need to look at the word forgiveness, look at the word state, and understand what we mean by it. We're letting people go who murdered our children and to walk away scot-free with a confession. How much are we supposed to forgive? There are some things I do not forgive. There are some things I cannot forgive. Now, when I saw my mother for the last time in a Jim Crow wooden stinking hospital in the South, and she asked for a glass of water, and the white nurse wouldn't let me give her a glass of water. And I don't know whether a glass of water would have prolonged her life another hour or another day. But she was entitled to some water. When I tried to pour it for her, the white nurse let me know that I was not an employee there, and she's the one who decided who gets water. And I don't hated hospitals. I hated sometimes the personnel in hospitals. I get a feeling in my stomach every time I go near one. I did not forgive, and I never will forgive. There are some things I think it's best to try to forgive and forget. But what they're asking of us is what has never been asked of another people. When Europeans catch a European bandit on their land, they kill him and drive him away. We have caught some bandits in our land. And sometimes, in fact most of the time, especially in South Africa, we should do the same thing. When Nelson Mandela came to power, whites controlled 87% of the land. They still control 87% of the land. Now, the agreement that he's contemplating making with Buthelezi, the most important thing, it will give different people in South Africa back their traditional land. If he can get away with this kind of treaty, but with sentiment serving such an important part in Africa, I think Africa will sentimentalize it to the point where they're going to say, let them keep the land on these terms. And if they can get it in one term, then they'll take it on another term. It's just if you catch somebody on your land, they have to leave or stay only on your terms. And what's being asked of us and the commission in South Africa, partly headed by Bishop Tutu, is to forgive and forget. And people now can come before us and confess, find machine guns at Africans at Soweto. And that other atrocity. Women, children, dead, gone. I can't, and I must forgive, it's a little too much. I am at heart a Pan-Africanist, and I want to conclude my remarks on the score of Pan-Africanism. We need not separate ourselves based on who's from little speck of dust in the Caribbean Sea, who's from Africa, who's from Georgia. Late at night, when you're trying to get a cab at Kennedy, nobody cares where you are from. If your face is black, you're going to have a difficult time getting that cab.
Yeah.
And I've been in this situation, and I thought of Johnny Johnson, a black multimillionaire. His chances would be no better than mine, maybe less. He's taller, equally black, and the cab driver might be a little afraid of him. And the cab driver might take a chance with me. So I hang there. I'm passed up about 7 or 8 cabs and pass me by. Then a brother comes along. He knows that from Kennedy into town is about $25, really. Brother, I'll take you $50. So the brother comes and takes advantage of the situation, cheats you, takes you home. So he's become a crook among crooks, but a different crook. He knows when he looks at you, ain't too much you can do to him, you know, size things up, you know. So he'll take you. And you don't always get a brother to come by and take you. You wait and let some independent car hustling up a little money will take you into town. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about nation. If you are part of a total nation, if you are a citizen of a total nation, then this don't supposed to happen to you, because your citizenship is supposed to be on the level with other citizenships. And what is it now, right now? You can go into an African bank, and if you're not first in line, whites will be waited on in preference to you, because the mind has been controlled, oriented in such an extent it still follows colonial instructions 30 years after the physical presence has been gone. But we have to think in the framework of nation. What is a nation? What goes into the making of a nation? And we must have on hand every item, spiritually, culturally, and politically. We have to lose our sentiment about so many of others who are not delivering, but who are prancing, playing games with time and situation. Things began to move more and more towards some form of correlation. People sometimes misunderstand the nature of commitment. In the case now of Betty Shabazz said, I said, I will pray, I will do this. A good physician trained in how to handle a burn case can do more for her than 1,000 people on their knees. I'm not against people being on their knees, but I'm saying that while you're on your knees, somebody else will have to be doing something else, more concrete, where the proof, the results, is more apparent. It's not one or the other, but each in its own place, doing the job it needs to do. And too many times people train for jobs don't get the jobs they're trained for among us, and we send away to get someone else to do that same job. We have to work well with each other, and I call Tommy to a Tom. Sometimes you're going to have to Tom a little bit to a Tom in order to get things done. I don't think we know each other quite as well as we should. And many of us think, because of separate geography and colonial masters differ, there is a great deal of difference between the different approaches to different ones of us based on background. Our enemy don't think no more of someone from an island, or someone from Georgia, or someone from Carolina. You don't think no more.
Hey, you.
And so we have to stop all this nonsense, dividing ourselves based on sororities, fraternities, and social organizations, or what little speck of dust in the Caribbean Sea that gave us birth, inasmuch as we had no control over any of it. And when people are out of power so long, they long desperately for power. And when they get close to it, they panic. And they spend so much time literally giving it back to the person who had it in the first place. We have to, if we are going to follow prescription, which I've laid down, Pan-Africanism or perish, if we cannot develop a concept of an African world union and participate one to the other, we might as well go out of business as a people, because nobody is going to respect anyone who are not the masters of themselves, feeding themselves, educating themselves, and protecting themselves. There is no European solution for your problem.
I know that's right.
Even if you join them in capitalism, you are a servant of capitalism. You don't have to join them in socialism. Well, you had that before they had shoes. You had that all along. All you have to do is to develop a socialist system that will take into consideration our total culture, our religious commitments, our spirituality. And we have to understand, before the rise of Europe and the occupation of Africa by Europeans, all of the killing, there was no killing, of genocidal killing of Africans against Africans. Prior to this period, the one war in Africa, because the largest amount of casualties, was the Zulu Wars, lasting from the late 1700s to the middle of the 20th century. But a war was to keep the European out of Africa. I'm saying that we have to accept some responsibility for for stabilizing the Caribbean islands, the whole continent of Africa. Have to have some kind of method of dealing with the Arabs and Islam, because no one came to Africa to do African people any good, and that includes the Arabs. And there's a good library of information on the subject, but if people don't want to read it or consider it, that's not exactly my fault. But nobody came to Africa to do Africa any good. Among the other things I'm working on is the role of the missionaries in conquest. Showing you that the Hebrew missionary was mainly commercial and still is. Christianity is mainly commercial and still is. Did you hear how many priests in the Congo? Over 10,000 priests in the Congo. Why is it that you can get guns to kill each other, and you can't get farm equipment to feed each other? Why are you so easy to get guns? You don't manufacture no guns. Why can you get them so easy? And why are you so difficult in getting farm equipment and basic things to teach kids basic technology? What I'm saying in conclusion, that our children should be trained from birth for some form of leadership. Find out what he can best do and make sure that he has a chance to do that particular thing and make a contribution to the total of the people through that particular thing that he gets done best. I'm afraid we're going to have to come together among African people. Some we may not like, and some may not like us. But we're going to survive. All of us are going to have to come together into a great Pan-African union. I think a union of committed Africans will save all Africa. And because we have no desire to conquer the rest of the world, which wouldn't make sense anyhow, we'll make a contribution to the stabilization not only of Africa, but the whole world. And we did it once, and of course, we can do it again. And I thank you.
The subject of black history is in dispute in some quarters. A man named J.A. Rogers, who was laughed at 20, 30 years ago, not taken seriously at all, is being taken very seriously these days. A new book called Great Black Men of Color has been edited by our guest tonight, Professor John Henry Clark.
I was supposed to be here early. They gave me another assignment. They didn't pick me up to go to the assignment. I followed their instructions and waited at the hotel. I would love to be here when I can be more fully in depth on this subject, because there's a whole lot of illusions about Africa's relationship with other people in the world. There's a whole lot of illusion about our relationship to the religions in the world. And these belief systems that had its origin in Africa, all of them, and there is no exception, turned on African people. I said there is no exception. And there's one thing you have to get through your mind and keep it. Nothing that ever came from the European mind was meant to do anything but facilitate European domination of the world. And I said there's no exception. Everything that was brought into this continent, everything, every idea, every so-called religion was meant to dominate and to control. The Arabs had no illusions about it. The Europeans had no illusions about it. You were the ones with the illusions. And yet every element that went into the making of every major religion in the world started in Africa. Why is it that you are so naive? You let people redress something that you invented, sell it back to you, and enslave you through it. I'm saying that all organized present religions are male chauvinist murder cults. And I say there is no exception. So I wanted to be here early. I wanted to deal with our relationship with the people of the world and the fact that we created peaceful nations that had no word for jail because no one had ever gone to one. No word for old people's home because no one ever threw them away, grandma and grandpa. No word for orphanage. We did all of this, and over half of human civilization was over before we knew that a European was in the world. Before he wore a shoe or lived in a house that had a window. Now, Africa has always and still is the prize for the whole world. We as a people have always been the world's richest people, culturally rich, mineral rich. We have always been the prize because we have always had and still have something that other people won't, think they can't do without, and don't care to pay for. Because we have always been the prize, we have been under siege for over 3,000 years. Nothing that ever brought into Africa from the outside was meant to do the Africans any good. That means all other religions. Islam was the handmaiden of Arab imperialism. Christianity was the handmaiden of European imperialism. The Hebrew faith was the handmaiden of a concept called the chosen people. Now, if God is kind and God is merciful and God has no stepchildren, he won't choose one over the other. And to say he chose some people, you're making him a bigot. And to say that he endorsed enslavement of one people over the other, you're making him an accessory to murder. The Arabs used Islam to rationalize their slavery and their imperialism. The Europeans used Christianity to rationalize their slavery and imperialism. Who are you kidding about friends in the world? Damn it, if you want a friend, look in the mirror. There's 1 billion African people on the face of this earth. Why are you buying third-rate junk from third-rate people thinking you can't make it? Why don't you at least make a safety pin to hold your child's diaper together? Who has programmed your mind into thinking you can't make a car? The first man that made a car, they had never seen one previously. The Japanese bought cars, bought locomotives, broke them down and studied them, and had a Japanese technician produce each piece, put it together, and had a much better train than the one they copied from. All knowledge in the world belongs to everybody in the world. Yes. Who has programmed our mind in assuming that we cannot run a nation and run it well? The main thing imperialism did, slavery and imperialism, they removed African people from the respectful commentary of history. And they tell them, something they are still telling them, and all of the organized religions are guilty of this. I favor none of it because Africa didn't need any of it. I'm saying that African belief systems, properly understood, is 10 times better than Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And better for the African. Now you might have some romance with one of these religions. I have no romance with any of them. I have a romance with reality and truth. And the chips can fall where they may after I tell it. As for friends, you have had no friends. When they discovered you, they began to prey on you.
Come on.
Now let's look at our relationship with Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East. For 3,000 years, our greatest enemies came from Western Asia. They were trying to avenge the fact that they were once African colonies. You read a book called When Egypt Ruled the East, and you get some of the basic information on this. Now, the first visitors to Africa came in the 1700s BC. These were the people who would later be called Hebrews. Now, black people are ticklish on this because black people think that everything in the Bible is true. I question the intelligence of anyone who thinks everything in the Bible is true or supposed to be true. It's allegory, stories told to illustrate a point at a time when there were very few people reading books. And most of what went into the making of the Bible was copied from Egyptian texts.
Come on.
Now, if you want to get so dewy-eyed over the Bible, which is a carbon copy of a carbon copy, why don't you go back and read the original Egyptian text?
Come on.
Then you see where all these stories started from. You see where the story of the Exodus started from. Now, you get so dewy-eyed, you actually think there was an Exodus. These people walked into Africa. Why couldn't they walk out? Why did they have to go by sea? No. Why did they have to part? If you read Egyptian literature, you will discover that the whole story of somebody parting the sea started with about 3,000 years before the Hebrew entrance. I should not use the word Hebrew entrance, but the entrance for Western Asia. Now let's get one thing straight, because black people are confused about all religions.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not against any religion. I'm a very spiritual human being. I just don't need a preacher to preach no 10 Commandments to me when he's a backslider going with some other man's wife.
Come on, man.
I'm intelligent enough to pick from the 10th Commandment, not commandments anyway, but the omissions of purity at the great school at Luxor, the great African training school. All right, now, let's get into this Western Asia. I'm saying that the people who came from Western Asia escaping famine did not have any Hebrew faith when they came into Africa. And there's no record of a Hebrew faith before that. Why is it that when they left Africa in the so-called Exodus, they had all three? African culture, an African religion, and an African language. Now look at the origin of so-called people you now refer to as Jews. And you're mistaken using that reference because the word Jew is of European origin. And the people in Europe who call themselves by that name have no relationship to the biblical people of the Hebrew faith. And I'm saying that the people we now call Jews entered world history with that visit to Africa. And when Africa was invaded, 1675 BC, instead of joining the Africans who had been their beneficiary and saved them from starvation, they joined the enemies of Africa. No one has ever returned any favors to us. As a people, we have always been hospitable to strangers, mostly the wrong strangers. And what we have to understand now, in the period of superior brainwashing, is there is no European answer for African problems. Either Africans find a solution to African problems, or there is no solution, and if you don't find a solution soon, you go back into slavery. We have to stop all of this nonsense about who belongs to what religion when all of them were imposed on us in the first place. We stop all this fight between Muslims and Christians when neither one of the religions are doing them any good or moving them toward independence. All of them are handmaids of conquerors. All of them are religions of conquerors. We were naive when we accepted their interpretation of something that we had all along. I'm saying we need to take a good look at ourselves. I'm not talking about burning churches. I'm not talking about getting rid of religions. Understand me well. I am saying that every single thing that touches your life, religious, socially, and politically, must be an instrument of your liberation, or you must throw it into the ash can of history. Develop a liberation Islam. Yes. And if you develop a liberation Islam, you have to turn on the supreme slave traders who were in the slave trade 1,000 years before the Europeans, the Arabs. Yes. And most brothers who think they're Muslims are merely Arabists. Forerunners, vanguards of Arab propaganda. The Arabs are not above joining the Jews against black people. In America, they're already doing it in Detroit. In America, they're already doing it in real estate. You got some dewy-eyed thing that you got a friend. I still ask you to look at that mirror. And if nothing staring back at you is friendly, then you've got no friend. But this is where you start friends. All right. I'm saying something which you need to reconsider. I'm saying that everything that came into Africa, every people that came into Africa, did not come to do Africa any good. Everyone and every religion and every people who came into Africa declared war on African culture. They began the bastardization of African people, created confused mulatto who didn't know whether he to be loyal to his mother's people or his father's people. That confusion is still here. The fascination for the color of the conqueror and the fascination to go to bed with the conqueror. Now that's wrong and mean, but it's true. Now, some time ago, a North African leader, Gaddafi, was sending some Libyans to study in Europe. And he told them what any good nationalist would tell students going to study, I'm not sending you to Europe to find a wife. I'm sending you to Europe to gain the technology to come back and make Libya a strong nation, a strong Islamic nation, and a strong Arab nation. And you cannot achieve any of this between the legs of a European woman.
Come on. Come on.
When is somebody going to get strong enough to tell Africans going to school, you're going to come back home and pair up with a sister, but if you want to pair up over there, stay over there. Now, the one thing we have to look at, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to conclude on this because I've left out a body of information. At the university, I teach an entire course, semester course, on Africa's relationship to other people. And I devote several semesters to Africa before Europe, the consequences of the coming of the Greeks, who stole a lot that they think is their culture, stole a lot that you think is Greek philosophy. We've been the victims of propaganda. And yet, if you read the Journal of African Civilization, other works. We have lived in Europe, we've lived in Asia, we've lived in the Americas. The African people have already proved that they can get along with different people, amalgamate their culture with different people without one hint of a war between us. People who come into Africa immediately declare war on African culture, standards of beauty, standards of conduct, and change the African concept of theirs so they can rule through him. This was true of the Greeks, who began the bastardization, again, the European bastardization of Africa. The Western Asians had begun it 3,000 years before that. The Romans, a bunch of well-dressed thugs who could write well but couldn't think, who borrowed practically everything. They laughed at the Africans' concept of Christianity. The African was practicing and not giving it a name. This is why you don't know nothing about the African origins of Christianity. This is why a whole lot of people will not read Ben Yarkinen's The African Origins of the Major Western Religions, Africa, Mother of Western Civilization, a Black Man of the Nile. Because he's telling it like it is, but you also will not read white radicals who identified Africa as the origin of the great religions of the world, especially Alvin Boyd Kuhn in his work, Who is This King of Glory? In shadow of the 3rd century. We have dealt with John Jackson, another radical black historian, like Man, God, and Civilization. We let some of our great scholars die in hunger, die wanting for friendship. Now, having devoted my greater portion of my life to scholarship and teaching and digging up information on African people and trying to make African people face reality, I have often said, a point that I wish you to consider, I didn't have to do it. I chose to do it, and if I had to do it over again, I would do it better. But I have a lot of talent other than the talent to teach and to research. I've never met a rich man who had a better mind than me. So if I were to succeed as a rich man, I could have done that. I never met a crook who wasn't a fool. I could have been a good crook if I chose to be a crook. I chose to be a teacher of African history. I chose to look in the Bible where I couldn't find my people. I started looking for them in the world, and I didn't stop until I found them. And I know why they are left out of the Bible. I know why all the angels are white. You mean to tell me God is merciful, God is kind, and not one little brown or black angel sneaked into hell? I ain't buying that. Now the Bible that you get so dewy-eyed over is one of the greatest pieces of propaganda ever written. If you want to read the Bible, why don't you read the Bible one day and read Mein Kampf the next day and see the comparison? That's hard on your mind. Because you think if you don't have Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, you don't have that spirituality. I've got more spirituality after I put all of them down. And I've got more religion after I put all of them down. All right, now let me conclude something that has no conclusion. We have to look at the impact of Europeans on Africa. All impacts have been negative. The Romans laughed at the early African Christians. Finally, for political reasons, they stopped killing Christians and became Christians. I'm saying the Europeans became Christians for political reasons, as the Arabs became Muslim for political reasons, and as the so-called Jews became Hebrews for political reasons. People use organizations for political reasons, and what we get so dewy-eyed and think we're dealing with the truth. If you look at indigenous African belief systems, If you look at the idea when Africans had no churches of any consequence, because these fools came here and said, this is the house of God, and the African looked at that church and said, if God who made the wind, the spring, made the ocean roll, and you're going to tell me he can fit into a little thing you call a church? That is no house of God. So some of them had the common sense enough to move away from it, and some had the common sense to burn it down. I'm saying that you're closer to God when the further way you get away from organized religions that are all handmaidens of conquest. The Roman Empire developed during the early period of Christianity. Remember, the Roman Empire started in Africa. It rose in Africa. It fell in Africa. A lot of people need to stop reading some religious books and read some straight history. Without fable, without supposition, without myth. Read straight history. Read the Mediterranean world in ancient times. She's a racist bigot, but her chronology is good. It is a good history of the European trying to move out of Europe into the Mediterranean to find something to eat, to put on that gosh darn awful European food. He has solved his problem at the expense of other people. The slave trade liberated Europe from the depressed economy they had created with the so-called Crusades and through the famines and the plagues. Europe always solves its problems by preying on people outside of Europe. They're in a position right now that they have betrayed true socialism, which was not of European origin in the first place. And some people are confused between Karl Marx and Groucho Marx. I think a lot of people are Groucho Marxism instead of Karl Marxism. They're funny people. And if you think that system started in Europe, no system as humane as socialism could have started among a bunch of icebox people who pay on their brothers for their breakfast. Read Kwame Colson's work, The History of the Modern World, especially the early chapters. Now, the evidence of Africans in the New World, the evidence of 1,000 years of civilization before slavery, all of this I'm not discussing because there is no time. But when the Romans disgraced themselves in the mismanagement of Christianity, they created a vacuum. Islam moved into that vacuum. The Africans thought that Islam would get the Romans off of their back. They were right. Islam got the Romans off of their back, and the Arabs jumped on their back, and they're still there. Using Islam to justify it. Now, the African military man, because we are the greatest fighting machine in the face of the earth, if we ever discover this, people are going to start running. Under proper leadership, proper inspiration, properly equipped, the black man is the greatest human fighting machine God ever created. If indeed God created it. I think the gods of Africa created it. Once you lose track of your heritage, you lose track of your liberty in this world. The Europeans doing the slave trade not only read the African out of history, they colonized history, they colonized information about history. They colonized image. They colonized the image of God. Who told you Christ was white? He was born in that part of the world predominantly occupied by non-European people. So you should not get into the argument about whether he's white. All you have to say, was he a Greek? No. Was he a Roman? No. But these were the only people partially white in the area at the time. If he wasn't a Greek, he wasn't a Roman, he was one of those other people. You don't have to argue about the shades of color. So far as you're concerned, once you establish he was not a woman, he was not a Greek, your conversation is over. Now, if somebody else want to argue about his shade, well, that's their problem. And if you got a problem with color, then you got a problem with your mother and your father. You have insulted your mother and your father if you don't like what they gave you. I wear mine like a badge of honor. I dig it. I wear it well.
All right. Love it.
I'm saying in closing, and I am closing, that what you have to do is take a holistic look. Not only at your position in the world, but your potential in the world. You have to learn how to convert everything into an instrument of liberation or leave it alone. You have to realize there were no Greek fraternities and sororities until they were introduced to secret African societies. People get all dewy-eyed over something that was imposed on them in order to control them, without understanding that that's another imperial effort. So it bothers me, and although I have good personal friends who are Muslim, that not a single Muslim scholar have dealt with that 1,000 years of African independence before slavery and how the Arabs from the north systematically destroyed these nations. It did not occur. 1591, from Morocco, an army was launched against these great independent nations in inner West Africa. These were great states. And because of poor communication between African and African, there was enough armies in these states to march down to the coast and to drive every slave trader into the sea. But the communication between African and African was so poor. Even today, the East Africa is not too clear about what's happening in West Africa. And nobody knows what's happening in North Africa because the conspiracy to hold on to Africa is happening in South Africa and in North Africa. So the whites in South Africa willing to play a part, and the pseudo-whites in North Africa willing to play a part. In all this world, you have no friends. But if there are a billion of you on the face of this earth, scattered all over the world, what do you need with a friend other than yourself? Why can't you turn inward on yourself and say, I will wear no clothes I don't produce. Start with your underwear. I wear no shoes that's not made by a brother. You're creating a shoe factory, employment at once. Start buying airplanes, break them down and study them, later on make airplanes. What this whole thing is about is the restoration of confidence. It has been the role of these handmaidens of colonialism to destroy your confidence in yourself. You don't believe that you can look like a god. You don't believe the black father in your home is to some extent a god. That doesn't make the black woman less than a goddess. Because we produced the first human society that recognized and respected the female god. We produced the first human society that said you can't be a king unless you got a queen. You can't be a god unless you got a goddess. So you can see all of these social ills that people are defending now, none of it started in our countries. I defy anyone alive, and those who want to come alive, come back and prove me, I invite them too, to show me one single case of sexual deviance or maladjustment any place on the African continent for the coming of foreigners. I defy you to show me one case of teenage pregnancy, one case of ill treatment of women. We got confused with someone else's ideas, someone else's concept and definition of us. What we have to understand is that faith has not spared us for an idle reason. A whole lot of people who've been hit less than us are extinct. What is there in us that made us strong enough to take this heavy blow? 500 years of slavery, one way or the other. Slavery, neo-colonialism. What made us strong enough to survive? What is faith saved us to do? And inasmuch as we gave the world its first humanity, faith has saved us to give the world its last humanity. What we have to do is to believe it, to believe that we are worthy of it, and to believe that we are capable of it. What black studies should be about, what black religion should be about, is the restoration of the confidence. And the restoration of the confidence is we must rule the state again. There is not an imitation nation, that not an independent nation in Africa or the Caribbean Islands. They're all imitation European states. And what we have to understand is that the nation state is stagnant. The Africa did not live in a nation state, they lived in a territorial state. The African learned something very basic. Cultures have to be fertilized by cultures. People have to be fertilized by the interaction between cultures and cultures. This insecure European tightened his borders. You know, you got a passport to come here? The word passport is not in any African language. The things he invented to restrict himself, he imposed on other people. Once we gain confidence in ourselves, and once we look at that person staring back at us from that mirror and like what we see, and don't move from that mirror until you like what you see. Then, in coordination with other African people throughout the world, we will give the world a new lease on life. We will turn to all of our people and not one part of them, because we came from a matrilineal society that respected women to the point the lineage came down to the female side. We must answer the call of the great African-American poet, Margaret Walker, who said, "Let the dirges end, let a new peace begin. Let us write a new covenant for the freedom of ourselves in the world." African men throughout the world need to step forward and answer Sister Margaret and say, "Sister Margaret, we have heard your call. And because we have never been a society that excluded women, with our women at our side, we are ready to pick up the challenge. We are ready to start a revolution that will change the world. We won't get ready tomorrow because tomorrow's things are left to tomorrow. We will start our revolution right now, and we will start it with ourselves." Thank you.
That's what I'm talking about, man. We got that in. Hope you boys paying attention, man.